I got to tell you, I worked really hard. Oh, by the way, congratulations on your second place finish. You didn't tell them there were only 2 teams. I'm just saying. I worked really hard to drag some of that Southern California sunshine out here, unsuccessfully. People usually say, oh, you got that nice Southern California tan. I said, I didn't get a tan from Southern California. I usually get it from sitting in the boat here in Wisconsin. It's a Wisconsin tan. But this year I didn't tan. I rusted. What's the deal here? Our lake is up so high, it came up like 5 inches since I've been here. And my dock is underwater again, so I got to raise it. Oh, my goodness. I mean, you know that I have 2 daughters. Which is not unusual, except for my daughters are 14 and 11, which I know what you're thinking when you look at me. That's weird, because he's an old guy, right? How did that happen? I can't remember. How old is he? Can't remember that either. But I'm in my 5th Medicare year. That's how I keep track right nowadays. But when my eldest, and they'll be here in the next service, when my eldest, who is 14, was about 9 years old, she came to me and she said, Papa, how do we know that God is true? How do we know that God is true? So this is a question of Dad, who is the apologist, the defender of the faith, to give her reasons to be confident that her conviction about God is an accurate conviction. So this is what I do for a living, and I've got this stuff in my head, but now I'm talking to my daughter who's 9, and I have to kind of speak in a way that would make sense to her. I'm thinking about it for a few minutes, and finally this thought pops into my head, and I just offer it to her. And I realized after I said it, and I've said it many, many times since then, because I realized that it really captures my whole approach to making the case for God. Now, God in the big picture, making the case for Christianity, more narrowly construed, is another project. But in this, but God's the foundation, right? And I realized that what I do really follows this basic principle. And so what I said to her when she said, how do you know that God is true? Is I said, honey, the reason that we know that God is true is because he's the best explanation for the way things are. Let me just say that again because it's so important. The reason we know that God is true is because he's the best explanation for the way things are. Now, I don't know where you're personally at here in this service. Most of you, Sunday morning, especially this early, are up early to come to church because you love Christ. You're Christian already. Many of you are young people who are Christians, but you're going off to an environment at the university where this isn't people's major conviction. In fact, they are going to be arguing for a different point of view, largely a godless universe. And they are going to try to, and are very effective at compelling many followers of Christ that are young to adopt their view. This may be your view if you're here today visiting. Maybe you're a tire kicker, whatever. Here's what I'd like to do in the brief time that we have this morning is I want to develop this notion that the existence of God, the reality of the kind of God that Christians believe in, turns out to be the best way of explaining the way the world is, the way that we know the world to be deep down inside. You don't have to have any religious training to know certain things that need explanations if we're going to make sense out of our universe. And it turns out that God is the best explanation for that thing. Now, my daughter Annabeth, at one point, she asked me, how do atheists explain this? Or how do atheists explain that? And she's raising this whole question of explanatory power. In other words, if you have a view of reality, if you have a take on the world, and Christianity is a take on the world, and atheism is a take on the world. In other words, this is the way the world is, either with God or without God. It seems to me those beliefs can't just stand by themselves in a vacuum. They are meant to explain the way the world actually is. And therefore, one's view ought to go further than just just be this conviction, but ought to make sense about other things about the world. And so she asked me at one point, how do atheists explain this on their view? Or how did atheists explain this other thing on their view? And so she began to internalize this notion a little bit of trying to explain the world from the perspective of one's world view. And so I want to approach that today. And what the point I'm trying to want to make is I want to give critique to atheism by critiquing its foundational concept called naturalism. Now, don't get thrown by these big words. I spent a lot of money to get a master's degree in philosophy, so I have to use them every once in a while, like metaphysical. But all I'm saying is metaphysical is just a metaphysical view is a basic view of reality, okay? If you're an atheist, your metaphysical view is materialism or naturalism. That is, all the world amounts to is physical things following natural law. Nobody's out there above God. There are no invisible things that exist. There are no demons. There are no gods. There are no spirits. There are no miracles. There's none of that hocus pocus stuff. It's just meat all the way. No souls either. There's just meat all the way down. That's a naturalistic, materialistic worldview. Now, Christians, of course, have a different view. And I think that the view makes sense to a lot of Christians because it fits the world a whole lot better than naturalism does. And so I want to critique atheism by taking a closer look at this core presumption that the natural physical world is all there is. Now, let me just say something about this project of kind of dealing with naturalism. There are so many people nowadays that disavow Christianity and disavow the Christian God or any kind of personal God at all. Even if they're not atheists, they're practical atheists, all right? They might think there's a force of some sort, but practically speaking, there is no one that they have to answer to. And consequently, we feel a little bit intimidated by trying to offer our ideas to them because they don't make sense to a lot of people. They're deeply committed to this other notion. And so naturalism in some circles is really a tough nut to crack. The first time I gave this talk was in Poland. And in Europe, virtually everybody holds this particular view. And they're so completely confident of it. They've never thought of anything else. Let me give you an insight here. Actually, I'm going to give you two on how to proceed on this process. And the first insight is that most atheists are so convinced there are no reasons to believe in God that when you give them any reason at all that makes any sense at all, and I'll offer a couple of them this morning, they are completely caught by surprise. They are completely flummoxed. And in fact, I've heard this many times, especially from people who used to be very hardcore atheists and then confronted the evidence, and God used that evidence to bring them to himself. And what they said was, I had no idea that there was anything like good reasons to believe. In fact, their notion of faith was a leap, pretending to know things you don't know. And by the way, a lot of Christians have that same view as well. But that is not the view of the New Testament. In fact, John ends his gospel with the reason he wrote the gospel. And here's what he says. It's in chapter 20. He says, many other signs and wonders Jesus performed, miracles, that I have not included in this book. But these, the ones I have included, I've offered you so that you would believe that Jesus is the Christ and the Son of God, and in believing have life in his name. In other words, the Christian view of faith is not a leap. It's a step of trust based in good reasons. And when we begin to offer some of these reasons for consideration for an atheist, this is where they get a little surprised. I never thought there could be anything like this. And by the way, many Christians have that same conviction. So so that's one little insight. The second little insight, that people are surprised that there's evidence for God in general and Christianity in particular. The second insight is when we make this engagement as followers of Christ, we have an ally, and the ally is reality. Let me say that again because it's really important. We have an ally in making our case. It is not denying reality, is not taking a wild leap of faith. It is actually engaging and embracing the world the way it really is and the way everybody, even atheists, know it to be. And then pointing out that the world that they're aware of is best explained by the existence of God. Now, I got this insight from Francis Schaeffer many years ago. He's gone now, but he had a tremendous influence on my life. And here is what the insight that really helped me, one of them. And that is that God actually exists, and the world is the way he made it to be. That's reality, okay? And every human being is, in fact, made in the image of God. And therefore, if Christianity is true in the deepest sense, then people who deny God's existence or the fact that human beings are somehow unique and special and are not just creatures in the world, anyone who denies that specialness or the uniqueness of God's world is denying reality. Now, reality is what you bump into when you don't take it seriously. And that's why I call this talk atheism bumping into reality, because what ends up happening is atheists bump into things that are real in the world that their world view cannot explain, but ours can. And what the strategy I'm suggesting to you is just simply pointing this out. Now, Francis Schaeffer calls this the point of tension. That is, they say the world is one way, but the world is a different way, and they bump into that. And when we see that bump, so to speak, we can point that out, use questions to ask them about that tension. Now, let me give you a very famous example of this. Probably the world's best-known apologist for atheism is Richard Dawkins. And Richard Dawkins, the British biologist from Oxford, denies God's existence and denies the existence of the non-physical world. Now, if you deny the existence of the non-physical world, moral obligations, what's right and what's wrong, are not physical things, they are non-physical things. Therefore, moral obligations in a naturalistic world do not exist. Okay? It's just a trick of evolution to get our genes into the next generation, the selfish genes, as Richard Dawkins would put it. And so in one of his writings, he makes it very clear that in this universe, and I'm quoting now, there is no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Now that's Richard Dawkins's atheism, his naturalism speaking, because if his view is true, then this is also true. No design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Good. Okay, so now Richard is being consistent with his view at that point. However, in another book, The God Delusion, as he's reflecting on the God of the Old Testament, he has this assessment. This is just actually a reduction here. This is a longer paragraph that actually is very elegantly written, but he characterizes the God of the Old Testament as a, quote, vindictive, bloodthirsty, homophobic, racist, genocidal, sadomasochistic, malevolent bully, close quote. That's just half of it. Now, what's unusual about that citation? What's unusual about that assessment by Richard Dawkins, the atheistic naturalist, of the God of Scripture? It's a moral assessment. Moral assessments like that make no sense whatsoever in his non-moral, atheistic worldview, in which there is no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. He is not indifferent to the God of the Old Testament. There is no God, and I hate him, is his view. Now, that kind of assessment makes sense in our worldview. I don't think it's an accurate assessment of God, but at least that kind of assessment makes sense. It makes no sense in Richard Dawkins' worldview. What's going on there? Richard Dawkins is bumping into reality. He is declaring the world to be a certain way, atheistic, and then he cannot keep himself from making moral judgments. In this case, about the God of the Bible. Why can't he keep himself from doing that? Because he happens to be a human being made in the image of God, living in God's world, and that is reality. And he's bumping smack into it. By the way, people do this all the time. Our job is simply to pay attention, and if we're alert to the ways that they bump into reality, we can begin asking questions about the coherence of this kind of statement coming from somebody who's an atheist or a naturalist, okay? So what I want to focus in on here is not just the contradiction that seems to be in the atheist worldview, but also the concept I introduced just a little earlier, the notion that Christianity can take it further. We can actually make sense of the way the world actually is. So Christianity, using kind of scientific language here, has better explanatory power when it comes to certain things than atheism does. And that's the approach, okay? That's kind of the strategy I want to employ here. And I want to suggest a couple of ways to take advantage of this. That is to employ this basic strategy of bumping into reality and explanatory power. So what are some of those bumps? I actually have 3 of them here, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get to all 3, but I'll certainly cover 2 of them, okay? I'm going to call these bumps the bump of stuff, the bump of bad, and the bump of me. The bump of stuff, the bump of bad, and the bump of me. And for those who are a little bit more students in this is basically the cosmological argument, the moral argument, and the existential argument, okay? But you don't have to remember those words. Bump of stuff. Here's my starting point for this point. Stuff exists. Not too controversial, all right? Stuff exists. The naturalists cannot easily deny stuff exists because for them, stuff, physical stuff, is the whole world, is everything. Here's the question: why is there stuff? Why is something here rather than nothing here? And I employed this strategy when I was asked during a Q&A session. And by the way, tonight we'll have a Q&A. I usually open up with about 20 minutes or so of just thoughts, comments, much like I do the radio show, which I've been doing for 30 years now. And then I start taking calls. So we'll do that here. I'll be down there. It'll be a little bit more informal. And if you have questions, and if you're not a follower of Christ, you're certainly welcome. And I'll do my best to answer as best I can any challenges or questions that you have. But a lot of Christians have been challenged by others or have their own questions, and I'll do my best to respond to them. Okay. In any event, there was a Q&A session, and a gentleman raised his hand and he said, "Prove to me God exists." That was the way he put it. And I said, well, there's a little difficulty in the way you put your question, and I want you to think about this, because sometimes people might press you with the same challenge. Prove to me. I said, first of all, you said prove. I have no idea what you count as proof. And by the way, if somebody says, prove to me anything about Christianity or God, and you do not settle that question, you could be really educated in apologetics and defending the faith and come up with all of this really good evidence, and all the other person has to say is nice, but that's not what? Proof. Okay, so you're stuck if you don't clarify that point. And I mentioned that to the person. So I don't know what you count as proof. Plus you said prove to me. That means I have to overcome all of your psychological objections or concerns or whatever. And I don't know if I can do that. So I asked him, could you please reword the question or the challenge, the request? He said, yes. Okay, how about this? Can you give me any good reason that God exists? I said, okay, good. I think I can deal with that. He said, let me ask you a few questions. And those who know a little bit about stand to reason know that we use a tactical approach. I wrote a book on it called Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. It's coming out, by the way, in a second edition in the fall. 40% new material, just letting you know. But we use questions a lot to maneuver in conversations because they're friendly and they're conversational and they avoid confrontation, but they do a lot of good work, okay? So I said, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? He said, no, go ahead. I said, do you think that stuff exists? I mean, that was our starting point. Pretty non-controversial. Yeah, it does. Okay, so do I. We're in this. Okay, do you think, and here's the second question to this line of thinking, do you think that the stuff that exists has always existed? In other words, is the material world eternal? Now, there's almost nobody who believes that. Certainly not Christians. They think God made the world, okay? And certainly not non-Christians, because most don't think that, even the scientists and astrophysicists who study this, they think everything that exists came into existence some long time ago, and how long ago is a matter of debate, at an event called the Big Bang. Now, I know the Big Bang is controversial to some people, some Christians, okay? It doesn't bother me at all. And the reason is it fits so well into our story. And plus, I think there's really good evidence for it. And notice how our story begins. In the beginning, bang! Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you up. I mean, it fits right into our story nicely, okay, the Big Bang. And so I asked him, do you believe that everything always existed? No, it didn't always exist. It came into existence sometime in the past. Okay, now, here's the question, the third question that I asked the gentleman, and that's part of this line of thinking. What caused everything to come into existence? This is your key question. What caused that to happen? Now, you only have two alternatives. It makes it very simple. Either something or no thing. Either something caused it or no thing caused it. Now, I don't say something or nothing because it's too easy nowadays for folks to take nothing as if it were something. Yeah, everything came from something, and something was called nothing. No. When I say nothing, I mean no thing. All right? There was no thing. There wasn't even space, wasn't time, no thing. All of a sudden, bang, all of those just pop into existence. That's the other alternative. And of course, you realize that is wildly counterintuitive. Even if it could happen, which I don't think it can, our entire existence shows us otherwise, that effects have causes, right? Even if it could happen, it ain't the odds-on favorite. The odds-on favorite is that something, not no thing, caused the universe to come into existence. Now, if it's something, it would have to be something outside of the natural world. So that means there's something that exists other than the natural world because this other thing made the natural world, which means naturalism then is dead in the water. Naturalism as a complete view of reality is just simply false if something outside of the natural world caused the natural world, which is our conviction. And that something, pardon me, would have to be not only outside of the natural realm, but also really powerful, really smart. It'd have to be a someone, not a something. And the reason is only persons initiate actions. Dominoes can keep falling, causing other dominoes to fall, but somebody's got to kick that first domino over, an agent. And that's what we need here. You realize when you say that something caused the universe, you're getting pretty close to the thing that we call God. All the characteristics seem to match, okay? Well, they don't want to go there, right? But what's the only other alternative? The only other alternative is no thing caused it, which is worse than magic, all right? Thank you, Rick. All right. Second place, huh? 2 teams, all right. To say no thing caused the universe is worse than magic, because in magic you have a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. In this case, you have no magician, and you have no hat. You just have the rabbit popping into existence. Now look at, you may have other opinions, but I'm just saying, doesn't it seem like that someone made the universe is the odds-on favorite? Not that no thing made the universe, it just popped into existence out of nothing. Look at, ladies, if you came home and looked in your garage and you said, honey, what? Where did that new Mercedes SL come from? Sitting in the garage. And Dad says, just popped into existence out of nothing, honey. It's the way the scientists say that the universe happened, so I don't know why a Mercedes can't do that. Now, are you going to buy that? Not even on Father's Day, right? Okay, I get you. Because you're thinking clearly about the issue. The odds-on favorite isn't magic, okay? And to show you how much atheists are actually committed to the common sense notions, except for when it comes to God. I was at a dinner party once, a number of years ago. It's before my youngest was born, so it was about 12 years ago. Annabeth was about 2 or 3 years old. And a lot of religious folk that were part of this meal. I'm sitting next to the host, and his son is right across from me. And in the middle of dinner, the young man, who was about 18 at the time, announced to the dinner party that he did not believe in God. And he did so somewhat belligerently, okay? A lot of attitude. There is no God. Now, this was a complete surprise to everybody, got everybody's attention, including his dad, who had no idea. And he wanted to say there is no God, there is no evidence for God. It is irrational to believe in God, is what he said. It's amazing to me. So I'm sitting across and I'm trying to engage him. And I offered the notion I just offered you in conversation with him, which, by the way, can be shortened into a simple statement. A big bang needs a big banger, okay? There it is. There's the Kalam cosmological argument. There's different versions of it. But there's one version of it in a simple statement, easy to remember. Common sense. A big bang needs a big banger, okay? And I'm making this point to him. He's not having any of it, you know? And because remember, he wasn't interested in having thoughtful conversation. This is true with a lot of folks on this issue. They are just belligerent about it. They want to state their view and not talk about it. Well, not talk about your side, only talk about their side. So my final salvo was, look, if somebody, we're sitting in the kitchen or the dining area, there's a living room area here and there's a door here. If somebody, I said to the young man, knocked on that door over there, what would you think? Would you think that the knock knocked itself? Or would you think that someone knocked the door? Right? Especially if it was you get design argument thrown in. Well, he was just dismissal of the whole thing. So I figured, like a lot of conversations, you're not making any progress, just let it go. So I let it go. 15 minutes later, we're eating dessert, and as God is my witness, somebody's knocking on the front door. Who does that anymore? We have doorbells, right? Somebody's knocking at the front door. The young man across from me, the atheist, lifts his head like this, and he's surprised. He says, who's that? And I said, no one. Here's the key, though. What did he do? He got up and he answered the door, because he figured, without even thinking about it, that it's not the odds-on favorite that the knock knocked itself. Rather, probably somebody was on the other side, which it turned out to be, and it was one of his buddies, okay? Naturalism, atheism cannot explain where everything came from. It accepts that everything came into existence, but does not explain how that happened. We have an explanation. Someone, not no thing, is responsible for the origin of the universe. Dear friends, that makes perfect sense. It is completely consistent with all our ordinary intuitions about the world. And if God does in fact exist because he started everything going, then that means we stand before him in our lives. Now, this is something a lot of people are completely uncomfortable about. They don't want to be under the gaze of God. And so it's easier to say he doesn't exist rather than to acknowledge the reality of his existence. That is the best explanation for the way things are, at least in that area. That's the first bump, the bump of stuff. I'm looking at my clock right now. I'm probably not going to get to the third point, but I am going to get to the second. I'm going to call this the bump of bad, okay? Now let me ask you, I'm going to introduce this notion by asking you, what is probably the most durable challenge against the existence of God coming from atheists? And in fact, the same challenge gets raised by people who believe in God, even some Christians, under certain circumstances. What is the most durable challenge that people have raised against the existence of God? Help me out here. Problem of evil. So atheists raise this all the time. There's evil in the world. If God was powerful, he would be able to get rid of evil. If he was good, he'd want to get rid of evil, but evil exists, so probably God doesn't exist either. Now, that's a standard way of expressing the argument. I'm not going to deal with the broader issue here. That's a whole nother talk. Okay, but I want to point out some difficulty with the issue. Notice that what people are saying when they raise the objection, what's going on there is they're bumping into bad. They're bumping into the bad of the world. They see it. It's a reality. Now, we're kind of back to the same problem, and I want to develop it a little bit more, that I mentioned with Richard Dawkins earlier, okay? That on the one hand, the worldview does not allow for the existence of that kind of evil. It's all, as I said, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. That would be consistent. But now they're complaining about the evil in the world. And this happens with Christians as well. When difficulty and hardship befall them, where was God? Where was God in my life? Now, my opening comments tonight in our group discussion thing are going to be about that issue, okay? So I want to explain that a little bit, especially if you're going through a lot of hardship and struggle and trial in your life, and this is causing you to wonder whether or not God exists. I want to try to address that for you somewhat as a Christian, okay? But I want to look at the broader issue that there is evil in the world, okay? And in fact, I've written a book called Relativism, Feet Firmly Planted in Midair, to argue against the atheistic idea that there is no morality and argue for the existence of morality, real morality, true morality over everyone. And I've done a number of debates on this with non-Christian college professors. And the way I approach this is always the same way. And what I invite the audience to do is to consider the most obscene example of evil they possibly can imagine. Now, I worked in Thailand for 7 months in 1982, and I was working with Cambodian refugees who had survived the Cambodian Holocaust from 1975 to 1979. And in that time in Cambodia, 2 million people, half of the population of Cambodia, perished. At the hands of their own people, in fact. And so these that had exited and got into the camps were people I was serving, the ones that had survived that. And I have all these gruesome stories that I tell to the audience in my debates about what happened to those people. And then when I paint this unbelievably grotesque picture, and you could find some other illustrations if you want, but generally the atheist is the one that's already offering them. And the way they do it is say, how could your God exist when these things, and they point them out, have happened, okay? This is when you want to ask them a question. First, you want to ask them, what is your assessment of these things you're talking about, whether it's the Cambodian Holocaust or the Jewish Holocaust during the Second World War under the Third Reich, or any other kind of thing, sexual slavery. I mean, there's a lot of popular examples now on the left, things that they're deeply committed to, global warming. What is your assessment? Okay, their assessment is, and this is what I want them to say, is that these things are wrong. These things are evil. These things are wicked. These shouldn't take place. But apparently your God is allowing them to take place when they shouldn't take place. I said, okay, now I have a second question about your comment. The statement that you just made, are you making a statement about the behaviors themselves, or are you just making a statement about your own feelings about those behaviors? All right? Let me do this again because this is an important point. Are you making a statement about the behaviors, or are you making a statement about your feelings? Okay? Now, let me give an illustration to help you out there. I don't like Brussels sprouts. Maybe you do. I think they're disgusting. But that is not a statement about Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are just Brussels sprouts. That's a statement about me, about what I like, what my tastes are, what my flavors are. Some people like them, some people don't. There's a lot of people who approach morality in that way. It's called relativism. You know, this is wrong for me, it may be right for you. And so their statements about right and wrong are really statements about their own preferences, their own tastes. Okay? If that's your belief, you're welcome to it, but you're not welcome to the problem of evil. Because the problem of evil isn't that kind of thing. The problem of evil isn't like, I don't like Brussels sprouts. The problem of evil is a statement about actions that themselves are bad. Whether people think it's bad or not, they're still bad. This is the difference between objective morality, that is what's right or wrong objectively in the world, or subjective, relativistic, what's right or wrong for me. Okay? Just making the point, if you're a relativist, and there's a lot of people that talk that way, then you can't help yourself to the problem of evil, because there is no evil in the world. There are just things you don't like, but other people do like. You like to save people, Pol Pot likes to kill people. Well, what's the difference? They're just different tastes. Now, people know better, and that's why they raise the objection. They see behaviors that are wrong in themselves. Whenever you have a behavior that's wrong in itself, there has to be some standard that the behavior is breaking. When you say something is bad or even good, there has to be some standard that you're using to measure it by. So I don't know if there are bowlers here. Where's the closest bowling alley? It's not in town, is it? Do you have one in town? You have a bowling alley here? Really? No kidding. Okay. So how do you know a good bowler from a bad bowler? You know a good bowler from a bad bowler by the score, okay? The higher the score, the better the bowler. Until you get 300, that's perfect, right? And some people have done that. What about golfing? Where's Rick? It's the other way around. The lower the score, which he wouldn't know anything about that, but the lower the score, the better the golfer. And the perfect score would be 18, hole in one in every, right? And no one has ever done that, okay? But notice the point here. In order to say good or bad, you have to have a system of scoring. When we claim that certain things are objectively bad, they are breaking the law above all mankind. You have to have a law above all mankind. It's very simple, very straightforward concept. If there is no law above all mankind, governing all of mankind, then there can't be any breaking of the law, right? I don't know if any of you have gone to Germany, but there's a famous highway in there called the Autobahn. Can you violate the speed limit on the Autobahn? Can you do that? Can you break the speed limit on the Autobahn? No. Why not? There's no speed limit. If there's no speed limit, there's no breaking the speed limit. That's all I'm saying here. If there is no objective morality, then there is no breaking of objective morality. If there's no law out there, there's no breaking of the law. If there's no breaking of the law, then there's no evil. There are just things people don't like. That's the relativist problem, by the way. If there is a problem of evil, relativism must be false. There must be a law out there. But now I got another question, and this is where I'm just bringing it home here. And all I'm talking about here, when people raise the problem of evil, is they're bumping into reality. There is evil in the world. Sure, I acknowledge it. Do we have to explain it? Yes, we do, and there is an explanation. I can't get into that right now, but there is evil in the world. There are a set of laws that get broken. Where did those laws come from? Where did those laws come from? And Darwin will not help you here. I'm just telling you. Because all Darwinism can do is fool you into believing that there are laws that don't exist. It can fool you into believing there are laws that don't exist to help you get your selfish genes, to use Richard Dawkins' term, into the next generation. That's all. It's just another form of relativism. It's not going to help. Social contract, it's not going to help either. That's another form of relativism. No, you need a real lawmaker above the universal laws that govern mankind. And the only way you're going to get that is by God. So in a certain sense, I've said so far, when you look at the kind of stuff in the world, what explains the stuff? Either something or no thing. Something is the best explanation. That's our explanation. No thing is not the best explanation. That's the atheistic naturalist explanation. In other words, their explanation with the existence of stuff doesn't work. Ours is a better one. When it comes to bumping into reality on the moral side of things, now notice, by the way, the first is the existence of physical things. The second has to do with the existence of some non-physical thing, like moral right and wrong. So there is an immaterial world, after all, that entails moral assessments, moral judgments, moral obligations, and we know that exists because not only do we experience, but atheists talk about it all the time. Why is there evil in the world? What's that evil stuff? I thought evil's not material. It's not physical. Doesn't extend in space, doesn't have weight, doesn't respond to the laws of physics. What are you talking about? What are they doing? They're bumping into reality. They're bumping into reality that they can't explain, that they can't make any sense of in their worldview. But on our understanding that there is a God who is the author not only of the universe, but also the grounding for all the moral God is the government that passes the laws that get broken when people complain about the problem of evil. So here we have two different examples of reality that we all understand, that are begging for an explanation, and the naturalist comes up with nothing, radically counterintuitive answers, where the Christian theist gives answers that make complete sense. In other words, Christian theism, at least on these 2 points, is the best explanation for the way those things are. Now, I don't have time to get into the existential issue, but I'm just going to touch on it very briefly. I don't get time to develop it. But what the existential issue is the struggle that each human being has with themselves and with the world. How do we make sense of ourselves and the human struggle and the human needs that we have? And I was lecturing at Cal, University of California at Berkeley, a number of years ago. It's a huge audience. They even had overflow rooms. And I was talking about the problems of relativism. And when I got to the end of the talk, I said the idea that relativism is false and that some form of moral objectivism or moral absolutism, if you will, is true. This is what I had made the case for. I'm not talking religion now at this point in the talk. I was simply talking philosophy, ethics, relativism versus subjectivism, and the problems with relativism. Well, if relativism is false, then there are objective moral laws in the universe, and this has explanatory power, I told the audience. How so? I said, explain something that each of you struggle with. Explains guilt. Everybody feels guilt. Why does everybody feel guilt? I asked the audience. How about this? Maybe we feel guilty because we are guilty. Is that in the running? Is that a possibility? And then I said, and this goes directly to what I was referring to a moment ago as the existential issue. I said the answer to guilt is not denial. That's what relativism is. Relativism is an attempt to satisfy our guilt by saying we're not guilty because there are no laws to break, but we know better. First of all, we're accusing everybody else of breaking those laws, but we also accuse ourselves because we know that we have done so as well. And we are carrying a burden of guilt as a result. And I told the audience the answer to guilt is not denial, that's relativism. The answer to guilt is forgiveness. And this, I said, is where Jesus comes in. And up until that point in that evening, before this large crowd at the University of California at Berkeley, I had not mentioned Jesus' name or the Bible or Christianity or anything like that a single time. After I had laid the foundation, I bring Jesus in a way that speaks directly, not just to the, in a sense, intellectual issue of grounding for morality, but the existential heart issue of satisfying the longings that we each have for forgiveness. And I want to leave you there with that idea right now. It's the best place to end, the foot of the cross of Christ, because that satisfies the deepest yearning of the human heart, the satisfaction that Christ made so that we could be forgiven. When you talk to an atheist, someone who doesn't share your convictions, listen to what they say. Sooner or later, usually sooner, they're going to bump into the way the world actually is that does not fit their view. And when they bump into reality, simply point it out. Ask them questions about it. I thought you believed this, but now you're saying this. How does that fit together? Exploit that point of tension. Get them thinking. Help them to see that Christian theism, God, Jesus, are the best explanations for the way things